What if the fastest decline after 75 begins in a room nobody fears? Not a hospital room, not a doctor's office, not even the bedroom. Just a quiet kitchen with one chair pulled out, one plate unused, and one older person whispering, "It is easier if I just stay home." That is how Dorothy Miller's world began to disappear. She was 81, a widow in a small Ohio town, with clean curtains, polished furniture, and a Bible on the end table worn thin from years of reading. To anyone passing by, Dorothy looked fine. Her grass was cut, her porch was swept, her hair was neat every Sunday morning, even when she no longer went anywhere. But inside that house, something had started closing, not all at once. That is what makes this so dangerous after 75. Decline often does not arrive like thunder. It slips in politely, wearing slippers, carrying excuses, sounding reasonable enough to believe. And before we reach the final mistake, number 1, the mistake most families do not recognize until it has already taken hold, you need to see how the first door opens. Do not miss number 1 at the end, because that is the one that explains why some people seem to fade even when nothing obvious has happened. But we are not there yet. We begin the countdown with number 8. Mistake number 8 is shrinking your world before you have to. Dorothy did not wake up one morning and decide to become lonely. She simply made small choices that felt harmless. One Tuesday, the ladies from church invited her to lunch. Dorothy smiled over the phone and said, "Maybe next time. It is cold today." The next week, her neighbor asked if she wanted to sit outside a while. Dorothy looked through the front window, saw the folding chairs on the lawn, and said she had laundry to finish. There was no laundry. Then her daughter, Carol, offered to take her grocery shopping on Saturday. Dorothy said, "Just bring me whatever is simple. I do not need much." That sentence sounded humble, it sounded practical, but it was the beginning of a smaller life. Grocery shopping had been more than buying food. It was seeing Mr. Bell at the meat counter. It was greeting the cashier who remembered her husband. It was choosing apples with her own hands. It was standing in the world and still belonging to it. When Dorothy gave that up, she did not only lose groceries, she lost a doorway. After 75, life already tries to reduce a person's territory. Friends move away, old neighbors die. Night driving becomes harder. Stairs become less friendly. The weather feels more threatening than it used to. The body asks for more patience. None of that is shameful. That is ordinary aging. But the mistake is helping decline do its work faster than necessary. Dorothy began living in 3 rooms: kitchen, chair, bedroom. She still owned a whole house, but she no longer occupied a whole life. Her mail sat unopened for days, not because she could not read it, but because letters reminded her that someone expected a response. Her phone rang, and she watched it until it stopped, then told herself she would call back. She rarely did. Each silence made the next silence easier. Carol noticed the change in January. Her mother's voice sounded cheerful, but thin, not sick, not confused, just distant, as though Dorothy were speaking from the far end of a hallway. "Are you getting out much?" Carol asked. Dorothy laughed softly. "At my age, where is there to go?" That answer should make every person over 75 sit up straight. Because the moment a person starts believing there is nowhere worth going, the world starts believing it too. People stop inviting, family stops insisting, neighbors stop knocking because they assume privacy is preferred. Then loneliness becomes invisible. Dorothy's decline was not dramatic. She still folded towels, she still paid bills, she still watched the evening news. But something in her face changed when people visited. She became polite instead of present. She asked questions, but not with hunger. She laughed, but only at the end of other people's laughter, as if remembering the correct place to put it. One afternoon, Carol found 6 greeting cards stacked beside the toaster. Birthday cards, church cards, a note from an old friend in Indiana. All unopened. "Mother, why did you not open these?" Carol asked. Dorothy looked embarrassed. Then she said, "I knew what they were going to say." That was the sentence Carol could not forget. Dorothy had stopped expecting anything new. That is what shrinking your world does. It convinces you that tomorrow is only yesterday with different weather. It steals surprise first, then it steals effort, then it steals strength. And finally, it steals the little habits that keep a person connected to living people. This is why mistake number 8 matters so much. Isolation is not only being alone. Some people live alone and remain strong, curious, faithful, and deeply connected. Isolation becomes dangerous when a person stops reaching outward, when the front door becomes heavier than it really is, when every invitation feels like a burden, when comfort becomes a cage with a soft cushion. Dorothy told herself she was protecting her peace. But peace and withdrawal are not the same thing. Peace gives rest and sends you back stronger. Withdrawal slowly teaches you that nobody needs you, nobody expects you, and nothing changes whether you show up or not. That is a lie that sounds gentle enough to move into the house. The old people who remain steady after 75 usually have one thing Dorothy was losing. They have places where they are still expected. A pew, a porch, a grocery aisle, a phone call, a table, a neighbor's gate, a grandchild's school program, a prayer list, a small duty that says, "Your absence would be noticed." That sentence is powerful after 75. Your absence would be noticed. Dorothy had forgotten what that felt like. One Sunday morning, Carol drove over without calling. She found her mother dressed in a blue blouse, sitting in the living room, shoes beside the chair. "Were you going somewhere?" Carol asked. Dorothy looked toward the window. "I thought about church," she said. "Then I thought, everyone has their people." Carol felt a sting behind her eyes. "You are one of their people." Dorothy did not answer. She looked down at her hands, and for one brief second, the truth crossed her face. She wanted to go. She was not too tired. She was afraid of returning to a world that had learned to continue without her. That fear is common, and it is dangerous. Because once an older person feels unnecessary, the chair starts winning. The curtains stay closed longer. The body moves less. The mind receives less. Meals get smaller. Conversations become shorter. And the person calls it age when often it began as retreat. The answer is not to pretend life is easy after 75. It is not. The answer is to keep one living doorway open at all times. One place to go. One person to call. One small responsibility. One weekly reason to be washed, dressed, and expected. It does not need to impress anyone. It only needs to keep the soul from folding inward. Dorothy's first step was not heroic. Carol did not drag her to a banquet or force her into a crowd. She simply said, "Mother, we are opening these cards right now." They sat at the kitchen table. One by one, Dorothy opened them. The first was from a woman she had taught in Sunday school 40 years earlier. The woman wrote, "I still remember what you told me when my father died." Dorothy read it twice. Then she pressed the card against her chest. Something entered the room that had not been there when Carol arrived. Not youth, not energy. Something better. Evidence. Evidence that Dorothy's life had left marks in places she could no longer see. That is the first crack in decline. Not medicine. Not a miracle. A reminder that you are still connected to the living world. But shrinking your world is only the first mistake. Because once a person stops going out, another danger often begins inside the house. It starts quietly, usually in the kitchen, with meals that become smaller, easier, colder, and less worthy of a person who still needs strength. And that brings us to mistake number 7. Mistake number 7 is eating like food no longer matters after 75. Frank Coleman did not think he was neglecting himself. That was the danger. He was 76, a retired mechanic from Tennessee, with thick hands, sharp eyes, and a laugh that still filled a room when he used it. But after his wife Ruth died, the kitchen became a place he avoided. Not because he hated food, because every cabinet reminded him of her. Ruth had known what to buy, what to thaw, what to stretch, and what to serve when family came after church. She could turn a pot of beans, cornbread, onions, and coffee into a Sunday memory. After she was gone, Frank opened the refrigerator and felt accused by silence. So he made toast. Then toast became supper. Crackers became lunch. Coffee became breakfast. Canned soup became the answer to every question his body asked. When his son, Daniel, stopped by, Frank always said the same thing. "I am eating fine. Do not fuss over me." But Daniel noticed the trash can. Empty soup cans, snack wrappers, paper plates, nothing green, nothing cooked with care, nothing that looked like a meal worth sitting for. That is how this mistake hides. It does not arrive wearing danger. It arrives wearing convenience. It says, "Why cook for one person?" It says, "Your appetite is not what it was." It says, "Standing at the sink is easier than setting the table." It says, "You have earned the right not to bother." And after 75, that sentence can become a thief. Frank started eating like his life no longer required maintenance. At first, nobody panicked. He was still driving, still telling jokes, still complaining about the price of everything. But slowly, small changes gathered around him. He stopped walking to the back shed. He stopped changing the furnace filter himself. He sat down halfway through folding laundry. Then he began leaving church before the closing hymn because he felt worn out. "Getting old," Frank said, waving one hand as if that explained everything. But not everything after 75 is just age. Sometimes what people call age is the cost of small neglect repeated every day. Nobody needs to be perfect. Nobody needs fancy meals. But the body still asks to be treated like it belongs to someone who plans to continue. Food is not only fuel for older people. It is order, it is rhythm, it is dignity. It is a reason to stand, prepare, chew slowly, clean the plate, wash the fork, and say grace. When meals collapse, the day often collapses with them. Breakfast disappears. Lunch becomes whatever is closest. Supper becomes television noise and something soft from a package. Then the person wonders why the hours feel shapeless and heavy. Frank's daughter-in-law, Denise, tried to help without embarrassing him. She brought chicken, potatoes, green beans, and sliced peaches in containers labeled by day. Frank thanked her, hugged her, and put everything in the refrigerator. A week later, Daniel found most of it untouched. "Dad, why did you not eat this?" Frank looked away and said, "It seemed like too much trouble to heat it." That answer frightened Daniel more than anger would have. Trouble had become larger than hunger. Effort had become larger than nourishment. The chair had become larger than the table. This is where many families misunderstand what they are seeing. They think an older parent is being difficult. Sometimes they are really grieving. Sometimes they are ashamed. Sometimes they are tired of needing reminders for things they once did without thinking. Frank was not only refusing food, he was refusing the proof that Ruth was gone, and he had to build new habits without her. Every meal for one felt like an announcement of loss. So he avoided the announcement and ate whatever did not ask him to remember. But the body does not understand grief as an excuse. It keeps score quietly. It notices whether it receives care. It notices whether the day has structure. It notices whether the person has surrendered to whatever is easiest. And after 75, easiest can become expensive very quickly. One evening, Daniel came by and found his father sitting at the kitchen table in the dark, not sleeping, just sitting. The television was off. The house was silent. On the table sat a sleeve of crackers and a cup of cold coffee. "Dad," Daniel said carefully, "is this supper?" Frank gave a half smile. "It fills the hole." Daniel pulled out the chair across from him. "You are not a hole." Frank stared at him. That sentence landed harder than either man expected, because that was what had happened. Frank had stopped feeding a man and started filling a hole. He had stopped seeing the meal as care and started seeing it as inconvenience. He had reduced himself to a problem that needed to be quieted until morning. That is mistake number 7. It is not eating simply. Many older people eat simple meals and do well. It is eating as though you are no longer worth preparing for. It is letting loneliness make the table meaningless. It is believing that because nobody else is there, the meal no longer counts. But it counts, especially when nobody is watching. A person over 75 should not measure a meal by how impressive it looks. Measure it by what it says. Does it say, I am still caring for the life God gave me? Does it say, tomorrow matters enough for me to be steady today? Does it say, I still sit at the table like a person with a future? Frank's turning point was small. Daniel did not lecture him about diet. He did not shame him. He took 2 bowls from the cabinet, heated the soup Denise had brought, made toast, sliced an apple, and sat down. Then he said, "We are eating at the table tonight." Frank grumbled, but he stayed. At first, he ate like a man performing a duty. Then Daniel asked about Ruth's cornbread. Frank looked toward the stove. His face changed. He began explaining the skillet, the bacon grease, the way she watched the edges. 10 minutes later, he was not just eating. He was remembering. He was teaching. He was present. That is the hidden power of a meal after 75. It can pull a person back into the day. It can restore rhythm where grief has made life shapeless. It can remind the body and soul that care still matters. No meal can stop aging. But careless eating can speed up the feeling that life has become too much trouble. And once a person starts calling basic care too much trouble, another mistake is already waiting nearby. Frank thought he was saving his energy. He thought less effort meant more safety, more rest, less strain. But after 75, too much saving can empty the account it claims to protect. Because the next mistake does not begin with food. It begins when a person sits down for comfort, then slowly forgets how to stand up. That brings us to mistake number 6. Mistake number 6 is sitting down and calling it safety. Louise Parker was 84, and everyone in her family called her careful. Careful with money, careful with strangers, careful with the stove, careful with every step on the porch after rain. She had been that way all her life. But one November afternoon, caution crossed a line she could not see. Louise lived in Pennsylvania, in a brick house her husband bought in 1969. For years she moved through that house without thinking. Then one morning, carrying towels, she caught her foot on a rug and stumbled hard against the wall. She did not fall. Nothing broke. But something inside her confidence cracked. By supper she had moved the rug. By Christmas she stopped going into the basement. Her daughter said, "Mom, that makes sense. You should be careful." Louise nodded, grateful someone understood. But fear is clever after 75. It does not ask for the whole life at once. It asks for one corner. First, the basement. Then, the porch steps. Then, the mailbox if the sidewalk looked damp. Then, the church hallway if it seemed crowded. Louise began choosing the recliner because the recliner never surprised her. It did not shift underfoot. It did not ask for balance. It did not embarrass her in public. It held her like a promise. But not every promise is honest. The chair promised safety, then slowly charged interest. Her legs felt heavier. Her back stiffened. Her breathing changed when she walked from the kitchen to the bedroom. She stopped standing long enough to cook. She stopped bending to reach the lower cabinet. Then ordinary movement started feeling like a threat. Her grandson Tyler noticed first. He was 16, tall, restless, always half hungry. He came over on Saturdays to cut grass and take out trash. One spring afternoon, he stood at the open front door and said, "Grandma, come see the flowers." Louise smiled from her chair. "You tell me about them." Tyler laughed. "They are right there." She looked toward the porch as if it were miles away. Maybe later. Later did not come. That is how decline wins time from people. Not by saying never, by saying later, 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 until the body believes later means never. Louise was not lazy. Many older people who stop moving are not careless. They are afraid of falling, afraid of being found on the floor, afraid of the look on their children's faces, afraid one mistake will become the reason everyone starts talking about walkers, keys, and control. So they sit, and because sitting looks peaceful, nobody notices the prison being built. Mistake number 6 is not caution. Caution is wisdom. A handrail is wisdom. Good lighting is wisdom. Asking someone to carry something heavy is wisdom. The mistake is believing the safest life is the smallest life, the stillest life, the life where nothing challenges your balance, strength, reach, or courage. Louise's house became organized around avoidance. The telephone moved beside the chair. The remote stayed on the armrest. Water bottles sat on the side table. Her daughter praised the arrangement. "Everything is right where you need it." Louise smiled, but her eyes looked dull. Everything was close, and she was disappearing. One afternoon, Tyler found her watching a game show with the volume loud. The puzzle had been on screen, but Louise was not guessing. She was staring past it. "Grandma," he said, "do you want to walk to the mailbox?" She shook her head. "No reason. Bills and advertisements." He said, "Then walk with me just to prove the mailbox is still there." That annoyed her. Good. Sometimes love must be gentle, but not useless. Louise snapped, "Do not get smart with me." Tyler sat on the footstool across from her. "I am not. I just miss you being outside." There it was. Not an argument about exercise, not a lecture about aging. A boy telling his grandmother that her absence had weight. Louise looked at the door. Her hands tightened on the chair arms. "What if I fall?" she whispered. Tyler answered, "Then I am standing right here." That sentence did not remove fear. It gave fear company. The walk took 4 minutes. Not far, not impressive. Louise held Tyler's arm and stepped like the porch might betray her. At the mailbox, she was breathing hard, embarrassed by how little it took. Then a neighbor called, "Louise, I have not seen you in ages." Louise lifted her hand. For the first time in months, someone saw her somewhere besides her chair. That evening she was tired but different. She complained about her knees, then asked Tyler what flowers had bloomed near the fence. He grinned because he knew the answer mattered less than the question. The chair had not won. Not that day. After 75, movement does not need to be dramatic to be powerful. A walk across the room with purpose matters. Opening the curtains matters. Going outside for 5 minutes matters. Using the body carefully is not vanity, it is stewardship. It tells the soul, we are still participating. When people stop moving, they often stop trusting themselves. When they stop trusting themselves, they stop choosing. When they stop choosing, other people begin choosing for them. The older person who feared losing control may lose it faster by surrendering every ordinary motion too soon. Louise learned that safety is not the absence of movement. Safety is wise movement, supported movement, honest movement, movement that respects limits without worshipping them. A person can be careful and still be alive. A person can slow down without sitting down permanently. But stillness has another cost. When the body sits too long, the mind often starts sitting too. Days become passive. Questions fade. Decisions get handed away. Curiosity grows quiet. And before anyone says decline, a person who once carried stories, judgment, and prayer begins letting the mind go dim. That brings us to mistake number 5. Mistake number 5 is letting the mind go unchallenged after 75. Samuel Reed was 79, a retired postal worker from Georgia, and for most of his life, people called him Sharp. He remembered addresses from 30 years earlier. He knew birthdays, back roads, hymn numbers, baseball scores, and which neighbors had borrowed tools without bringing them back. His mind had been a busy room, full of names, stories, warnings, jokes, prayers, and decisions. But after retirement, after his wife's illness, after the house became quieter than he expected, Samuel stopped using that room the way he once had. At first, nobody noticed. He still dressed properly. He still paid attention when people spoke. He still nodded at the right moments. But his daughter Angela noticed something small at Sunday dinner. Her father had stopped asking questions. He used to ask about her work, her sons, the road construction downtown, the price of gas, the preacher's sermon, and whether the old pharmacy had finally closed. Now he mostly repeated what he had heard on television. Same complaints, same warnings, same stories, told in the same order with the same ending. Angela did not call it decline. not yet. She told herself he was tired. But Samuel was not only tired. He had stopped challenging his own mind, and the mind had begun living on leftovers. His bookshelves were full. His Bible had old notes in the margins, written in firm blue ink from years when he studied every morning. But the pages had grown flat and undisturbed. His crossword book sat beside the chair with only 3 answers filled in. When Angela asked about it, Samuel shrugged. "Those things make me feel slow now." That sentence should not be ignored. Many older people quit mental effort not because they cannot think, but because thinking reminds them they are not as quick as they used to be. So they avoid the discomfort. They choose what is familiar. They choose passive noise. They let the television talk so they do not have to wrestle with silence, memory, or uncertainty. But comfort can become a sedative. After 75, the mind does not need humiliation. It does not need pressure to perform like a young person's mind. But it does need engagement. It needs questions. It needs decisions. It needs stories told with care. It needs scripture read slowly. It needs names remembered on purpose. It needs something more than sitting under a flood of noise. Samuel's day had become predictable. Coffee at 7, news at 7:30, another program at 9, lunch from whatever was closest. More television, a nap that left him groggy. Then evening news, where he became angry about people he would never meet. By bedtime, he had consumed thousands of words and created almost none. He had heard opinions, but formed few fresh thoughts. He had watched life, but not entered it. That is the quiet danger of mistake number 5. The mind can be awake and still be unused. It can receive information without chewing it. It can complain without reflecting. It can remember without teaching. It can survive on repetition while slowly losing appetite for discovery. Angela saw the change clearest when her youngest son, Marcus, brought over a school assignment. He needed to interview someone older about life before cell phones. Samuel was the obvious choice. He had worked routes through heat, rain, dogs, strikes, elections, births, deaths, and every kind of household drama. But when Marcus sat with his notebook, Samuel waved him away. "You do not want old stories," Marcus said. "My teacher does." Samuel smiled, but it was a tired smile. Teachers make children do foolish things. Then he turned back to the television. Angela watched her son close the notebook. A library had just locked its own doors. That moment hurt her more than if Samuel had forgotten something. Forgetting would have been sad. Refusing to open what he still carried was something different. It was surrender. At the halfway point of this countdown, the danger changes shape. The first mistakes show how people lose connection, rhythm, and strength. But the next mistakes show how people lose authority, family closeness, and purpose. And number 1 is still waiting at the end, because the final mistake is the one that can make every other mistake seem normal. Samuel was not finished. That was the truth everyone around him still knew, except Samuel. Angela returned 2 days later with Marcus, but this time she turned off the television before sitting down. Samuel frowned. "I was watching that." Angela said, "Dad, Marcus needs 5 minutes. Tell him one thing about your mail route that nobody would believe." Samuel looked irritated. Then he looked at the boy's notebook. Something old stirred. "Nobody would believe Mrs. Hanley's rooster chased me 3 blocks in 1978. Marcus looked up fast. "A rooster?" Samuel nodded. "Meanest bird in Georgia." Angela stayed silent. That was important. She did not rescue the story. She let Samuel walk into it. First came the rooster. Then came the summer heat. Then the old mail truck. Then the widow who waited every Friday for a letter from her son. Then the lesson Samuel had learned about loneliness, pride, and why a letter could keep someone alive 1 more week. Marcus stopped writing and simply listened. Samuel's voice changed. It became stronger, lower, more exact. His hands moved when he spoke. His eyes focused. The room that had gone dim was not empty. It only needed a lamp. That is what mental engagement can do. It does not make a person young. It makes a person present. After 75, the mind should not be treated like a museum that people visit only to admire old things. It is still a workshop. It can still sort, warn, bless, remember, compare, pray, and teach. The mind does not need to be young to be awake, but it must be invited into the day. Read something and tell someone what it made you think. Learn one name. Write one memory. Ask one real question. Solve one small problem. Make one decision you still have the right to make. Because once a person stops using the mind, others quietly begin using theirs on his behalf. At first, that feels helpful. Then it becomes dependency. Then it becomes silence. Samuel's warning is clear. Do not let your mind retire before your life is finished. But mental surrender often leads to the next mistake, the one families argue about behind closed doors. Because when an older person stops trusting their own judgment, they may hide the truth instead of asking for help. And that brings us to mistake number 4. Mistake number 4 is refusing help until help arrives too late. Martha Ellison was 82, a retired church pianist from Missouri, with silver hair, straight posture, and manners that made bad news sound proper. She had buried her husband, raised 3 children, balanced checkbooks, and played hymns at funerals where half the town wept. Nobody who knew Martha would have called her weak. That was part of the problem. Martha had spent years being capable that needing help felt like being undressed. She said, "I am managing." Those 3 words can be dangerous after 75. Sometimes they mean courage. Sometimes they mean, I am hiding the truth because I am afraid of what my children will do if they see it. Martha's son, Paul, lived 40 minutes away. Every Saturday he asked, "Mum, do you need anything?" Martha always answered, "No, sweetheart, everything is fine." But everything was not fine. The porch railing had loosened, the basement washer had started shaking. 2 bills confused her. A jar of peaches sat unopened because her hands could not break the seal. None of these problems was a disaster. That is why she should have mentioned them. Small help early protects independence. Small help late becomes an emergency. Martha could not see that yet. To her, every admission felt like handing over authority. She imagined Paul arriving with opinions, forms, conversations with his sisters, and someone saying the words she dreaded most. Maybe it is time. So Martha chose silence. She put bills in a drawer. She avoided the front steps when the railing wobbled. She carried laundry down to the basement one careful step at a time, gripping the wall because moving the washer upstairs felt like defeat. When church friends asked why she missed Wednesday service, she smiled and said, "Just resting." But she was not resting. She was calculating. Which tasks could still be done? Which problems could still be hidden? Which questions could be answered without revealing too much? That is not independence. That is exhaustion wearing Sunday clothes. One afternoon, Martha stood in the basement with towels against her hip. The washer had finished. The air smelled damp. She looked up the steps and felt anger at them. How dare ordinary stairs become something she had to negotiate like a mountain? She began climbing. On the 4th step, one towel slipped. She reached to catch it, shifted her weight, and slammed her shoulder against the wall. She did not fall all the way. But the basket crashed down. Towels scattered. And Martha sat on the step, breathing hard, furious and ashamed. She stayed there for 12 minutes because she did not want to call anyone. She would rather sit alone on a basement stair than let her son know she needed one practical change in the house. Pride is not always loud. Sometimes it is an older woman sitting in pain, protecting an image that no longer protects her. When Paul came that Saturday, he noticed the bruise near her collar. "What happened?" Martha covered it. "Nothing, I bumped a cabinet." Paul opened the basement door and saw towels still piled near the bottom. The house told him what his mother would not. Martha's face changed when she realized he understood. "Do not start," she said. Paul did not raise his voice. "Mom, I am not trying to take over. That is what everyone says before they take over." There it was, the real fear. Not the railing, not the laundry, not the bills, the fear of losing command of her own life. This is why mistake number 4 must be handled with dignity. Older people are not wrong to fear being managed. Some families speak too quickly and forget that an aging parent is still an adult. But the answer to being afraid of losing control is not secrecy. Secrecy causes the very loss of control a person fears. If Martha had told Paul about the washer early, she could have helped choose the solution. If she had shown him the bills early, she could have stayed in authority while he explained the changes. If she had admitted the railing was loose, she could have fixed the danger before anyone called it a crisis. That is the hard wisdom. The person who accepts small help early often avoids large help later. Paul sat at the kitchen table and placed the unopened jar of peaches between them. "Mom, open this." Martha stared at it. "That is foolish." "Open it." She twisted the lid. Her hand trembled. The lid did not move. Her eyes filled with tears before she could stop them. Not because of peaches, because a jar had betrayed the version of herself she still wanted everyone to see. Paul reached across the table, not for the jar, but for her hand. "You are still my mother," he said. "A lid does not change that." Martha turned away. That sentence broke the argument because it named what she feared losing. Status, dignity, motherhood, authority, usefulness. Help, when given rightly, should defend those things, not erase them. That week, Martha let Paul tighten the railing. She let him move laundry baskets upstairs. She sat beside him while they sorted bills, and she made the final phone calls herself. Nothing about that made her less independent. It made her less trapped. But many people never make that turn. They hide until the family finds the bruise, the unpaid bill, the empty refrigerator, the unsafe step, the truth too late. After 75, wisdom is not proving you need nobody. Wisdom is knowing which help preserves your choices and peace. But there is one reason people refuse help even when they know they need it. They do not want to be corrected, pitied, or spoken to like children. And when that fear hardens, the next mistake begins. It sounds like criticism. It pushes away the very people a person is afraid to lose. That brings us to mistake number 3. Mistake number 3 is letting bitterness speak louder than wisdom. George Hanley was 80, a Vietnam-era veteran, former hardware store owner, father of 3, and a man who fixed almost anything. For decades, people came to George because he had answers. Then, after 75, he began feeling as if nobody wanted those answers anymore. His children were grown. His store was sold. His wife, Ellen, had passed. The tools in his garage hung in perfect order, but fewer people asked to borrow them. George did not call this grief. He called it common sense. He said people did not respect older folks now. He said families did not care like they used to. But under those sentences was a wound he never named. He missed being needed. Because he could not admit the ache, he covered it with sharpness. His daughter Lisa would call and say, "Hi Dad, how are you?" George would answer, "I would be better if people remembered telephones work both ways." His granddaughter Emily would show him a picture from college, and George would notice her clothes before her smile. He thought he was telling the truth. But truth delivered without tenderness can start sounding like punishment. That is mistake number 3. Letting bitterness speak so loudly that wisdom can no longer be heard. George had real wisdom. He knew how debt ruins families. He knew how anger follows a man home from work. He knew how marriage survives disappointment. But nobody could reach those treasures because he wrapped them in complaint. One Sunday, Lisa brought dinner to his house. Pot roast, carrots, potatoes, and the lemon cake he liked but pretended not to. George inspected the containers like a judge. "It is too much food," he said. Lisa smiled carefully. "Then save some for tomorrow." George grunted. People waste money because they do not know how to plan. Emily tried telling a story about a professor who praised her paper. George interrupted before she finished. "What kind of job does that degree even get?" The room went still. Emily looked down at her plate. Lisa closed her eyes for 1 second, long enough for George to notice, not long enough for him to stop. He kept talking. He explained how young people were soft, schools were foolish, and nobody listened until life knocked them down. He believed he was warning them. They experienced it as being pushed away. When dinner ended, Emily hugged him quickly and left. George watched from the window as the car backed out. He muttered, "Nobody stays anymore." But the house had been full an hour earlier. Bitterness has a cruel talent. It creates the loneliness it complains about. After 75, words carry more weight than many people realize. Younger relatives may forgive the first sharp remark. But after enough visits that feel like trials, they begin protecting themselves. Calls get shorter. Invitations become less frequent. Grandchildren share less. Adult children visit out of duty, not desire. Then the older person feels abandoned, and the bitterness grows stronger. It becomes a circle with no obvious beginning. George did not want distance. He wanted honor. But his pain had trained his mouth to strike first. Bitterness often borrows the clothing of righteousness. It says, "I am only being honest." It says, "I earned the right to speak my mind." It says, "They need to hear it." Sometimes older people do need to speak hard truth. But wisdom is not measured only by accuracy. Wisdom is measured by whether truth can enter another person without destroying the doorway. George had been emptying his own house sentence by sentence. The turn came after Emily stopped visiting for 6 weeks. George pretended not to notice. Then Lisa arrived alone on a Thursday afternoon. She placed a photo on the table. It was Emily at school, holding a certificate. George picked it up. "Why did she not tell me?" Lisa answered quietly. "She was afraid you would make her feel foolish." George's jaw tightened. "That is ridiculous." Lisa did not argue. She only said, "Dad, she wanted you proud, not impressed." That landed. Proud, not impressed. His family had not rejected his wisdom. They had grown tired of bleeding to receive it. For the first time, George saw the pattern without defending it. He sat down slowly. "What am I supposed to do?" he asked. Lisa said, "Start by blessing before correcting." George hated how simple that sounded. But simple is not easy after years of practicing sharpness. The next Sunday, Emily came by. George had rehearsed warnings about college, money, and wasted time. He swallowed all of them. Emily stood near the door, guarded. George pointed to the photograph. "Your grandmother would have put that on the piano," he said. Emily blinked. Then he added, "I am proud of you." The room changed. No one forgot the past. But a door opened. Emily sat down. George asked about the paper. This time, he did not interrupt. He listened like listening was work worth doing. That is how bitterness loses authority. Not by pretending pain never happened, but by refusing to let pain become the family spokesman. After 75, influence depends greatly on how people feel when they leave the room. Do they leave steadier or smaller? Do they feel blessed or measured? Do they want to return or recover? The elder's tongue can be a lamp, but it can also be a lash. George learned late, but not too late, that respect is invited by self-control, tenderness, and the courage to bless people still learning. But bitterness is not the final family danger. There is a quieter mistake, and in some ways, a sadder one. It happens when an older person still carries stories, warnings, prayers, recipes, names and lessons no one else knows, but says nothing. Then one day the family realizes a whole library was sitting in the living room, and nobody opened it. That brings us to mistake number 2. Mistake number 2 is failing to pass down what you know before it is needed. Evelyn Brooks was 86, a grandmother from North Carolina, with soft white hair, strong opinions, and hands that could still make biscuits without measuring. Her family loved her, but they had made a mistake with her. They treated her memories like decorations, pleasant to hear during holidays, but not urgent. Evelyn made the same mistake herself. She thought her stories were too ordinary. She thought the young people were busy. She thought there would be another Thanksgiving, another birthday, another afternoon when everyone would finally sit still long enough to ask. That is how priceless things vanish. Not because someone throws them away, but because everyone assumes they will still be there later. Evelyn carried more than recipes. She carried names written nowhere. She knew why her father stopped speaking to his brother. She knew which aunt quietly saved the farm. She knew which marriage nearly broke, then survived because one person apologized. She knew who prayed during the worst year, who lied, who repented, who sacrificed, and who should never be judged by one bad season. But most days, Evelyn sat with those things inside her and said nothing. Her granddaughter Claire was 29, married, and expecting her first child. One Saturday, Claire came over with a small recorder and a yellow notebook. Evelyn laughed as soon as she saw them. "What is all that for?" Claire said. "I want to record some family stories." Evelyn waved her hand. "Nobody wants to hear all that old stuff." Claire said, "I do." Evelyn smiled but changed the subject. She asked about the baby, the nursery, the doctor, the price of groceries. Then she served coffee and store-bought cookies because she said homemade was too much mess now. The recorder stayed unopened. That scene happens in families every day. An older person carries treasure and calls it clutter. A younger person asks too late or not firmly enough. The day passes. The memory stays locked away. Then, one funeral later, everyone starts asking questions nobody living can answer. Mistake number 2 is not forgetting stories, it is underestimating them. After 75, a person's value is not only in what they can lift, drive, fix, earn, or arrange. It is in what they can transfer. A family needs more than money. It needs memory. It needs warnings. It needs examples of endurance. It needs to know where it came from, so it does not become foolish about where it is going. Evelyn did not understand that her silence was not humility. It was withholding inheritance. She had a recipe box in the pantry, packed with cards written in fading ink. Some recipes had no measurements. Just words like enough flour, a little salt, bake until ready. Claire opened the box and laughed. "Grandma, what does enough mean?" Evelyn said. "You feel it." Claire answered, "I cannot feel what you do not teach." Evelyn went quiet. That sentence opened a door, not a wide one, just enough for the truth to enter. Claire was not asking because she had nothing better to do. She was asking because one day she would stand in a kitchen holding flour, grief, and a memory of a grandmother who either taught her or stayed silent. Evelyn sat down slowly. "Bring me that blue card," she said. Claire brought it. The card said Sunday biscuits. Evelyn held it like a photograph. "My mother made these the morning my brother came back from Korea," she said. Claire reached for the recorder. This time Evelyn did not stop her. The first story was about biscuits. Then it became about war. Then about waiting. Then about a mother who would not cry until everyone went to bed. Claire wrote quickly, but soon she stopped writing and listened. Evelyn's voice strengthened. Her eyes moved toward a place no one else could see. That is what happens when memory is honored. The older person becomes more than elderly. She becomes a bridge. The past stands up and walks into the room. Evelyn told Claire about the winter the family nearly lost the house. She told her about the neighbor who brought coal and refused payment. She told her about the cousin everyone called difficult, and why that cousin had never been the same after losing a child. Suddenly, family names became human again. Old judgments softened. Old courage returned. Claire realized she had grown up around conclusions without knowing the stories behind them. That is dangerous for families. When stories disappear, people inherit opinions without context. They repeat bitterness without understanding it. They waste lessons already paid for by someone else's tears. Biblical wisdom has always treated remembrance as sacred. Tell the children, mark the stones. Repeat what God brought you through. Do not let mercy become anonymous. Do not let warnings die with the people who earned them. An older person who tells the truth with humility can save a family years of confusion. But many remain silent because they think nobody cares. Some remain silent because the past hurts. Some remain silent because they are waiting for the perfect moment. There may not be one. The right moment is often a kitchen table, a quiet afternoon, a grandchild with a notebook, a phone call that lasts 10 minutes longer than usual. Evelyn began with recipes, but the deeper transfer came later. Claire asked, "Grandma, what is one mistake you wish you had avoided?" Evelyn looked at the window for a long time. "I stayed angry at my sister for 9 years," she said, "and when I finally forgave her, I realized pride had stolen more from me than she ever did." Claire did not speak. She was hearing something heavier than advice. She was hearing a life turned into warning. That is inheritance. Not polished stories where everyone looks noble. Real stories. Repentant stories. Useful stories. Stories that help the next generation recognize danger before it ruins them. After 75, do not assume your family already knows what matters. They may know your birthday, your address, and your favorite hymn, but not the lessons that formed you. Tell them how you survived grief. Tell them what debt taught you. Tell them who helped you. Tell them where you were wrong. Tell them what prayer sounded like when nobody had answers. Tell them before someone has to guess. Evelyn's family changed when she started speaking. Sunday dinners became slower. Claire brought questions. Her brother brought old photographs. Even Evelyn's son, who thought he knew everything, learned why his father had been so quiet after 1974. The family did not become perfect, but it became less rootless. A living library had finally opened. Yet even this is not the most shocking mistake. A person can stay connected, eat with care, keep moving, challenge the mind, accept help, soften their words, and pass down wisdom, and still decline fast if the final mistake has already taken hold. Number 1 is the hidden door. It is the moment a person quietly resigns from life while still breathing, still walking, still sitting at the table. Harold Whittaker did that, and almost everyone around him misunderstood what they were seeing. That brings us to mistake number 1. Mistake number 1 is the choice Harold Whittaker made without saying it aloud. Harold was 78, lived in Indiana, and looked stronger than he felt. He still owned the brown ranch house where his children had grown. He still kept tools in the garage, coffee in the same cabinet, and his late wife's photograph beside the lamp. Nothing looked ruined. That is why everyone missed it. Decline had entered Harold's house without breaking anything. It simply persuaded him that his remaining days did not require much from him. His daughter Karen noticed the curtains first. Harold had always opened them before breakfast. He liked morning light. He said darkness made a man lazy. But that winter the curtains stayed closed until noon. Then, sometimes all day. When Karen asked, Harold shrugged. Nothing worth looking at. She thought he meant the weather. He did not. Harold had stopped looking for life outside himself. He ate enough to silence hunger. He washed only when someone was coming. He let the newspaper pile up because news belonged to people still expecting tomorrow to matter. When neighbors waved, he waved back through glass. When churchmen called, he let the machine answer. His Bible sat beside the chair, close enough to touch, far enough to ignore. Karen tried practical fixes first. She brought meals, she changed light bulbs, she organized pills, mail, appointments, and groceries. Harold thanked her, then drifted back into the same grey routine. That is what frightened her. Help reached him, but it did not awaken him. Food was there. People were near. The house was safe enough. Still, something inside Harold had stepped away from the day. One afternoon, Karen found him sitting in the garage with the door closed, staring at an old radio on the workbench. It had belonged to his father. Harold had repaired it twice before. "Are you fixing it?" Karen asked. "No point," he said. "Nobody uses things like that anymore." Karen looked at the radio, then at her father. "Ethan might like it." Ethan was Harold's 12-year-old grandson, curious, impatient, always taking things apart and losing screws. Harold gave a dry laugh. "That boy has phones, games, screens. He does not want an old man's radio." There was the lie, spoken like common sense. Many people after 75 do not say, "My life is over." They say, nobody needs that now. They say, the young have their own world. They say, I already did my part. They say, do not bother. They sound reasonable, but underneath is resignation. Harold was not merely tired. He had quietly dismissed himself from usefulness. Karen did not argue in the garage. She had learned that lectures bounced off him. Instead, she brought Ethan the next Saturday and placed the radio between them. Grandpa knows how this works, she said, then walked to the kitchen before Harold could refuse. Ethan touched the dial. Does it still play? Harold stared at the boy. Not unless someone fixes it. Ethan looked up. Can you? Harold almost said no. Karen heard the silence from the kitchen. It stretched long enough to decide something. Finally, Harold said, Get that small screwdriver. Not that one, the small one with the red handle. For the next 20 minutes, Harold complained. Ethan held parts wrong. Ethan asked too many questions. Ethan nearly lost a screw. But Harold was leaning forward, his voice sharpened, his hands remembered. He explained tubes, wires, patience, and why forcing a part usually breaks more than it fixes. Ethan listened because Harold knew something he did not. That changed the air in the room. Harold was not being entertained. He was being needed. After Ethan left, Karen found the curtains open. Harold said nothing about it. He only asked if Ethan was coming back. That question was the first sound of return. But the full truth did not reveal itself yet. Harold still had bad mornings. He still spoke of the past more than the future. He still said, I am old, as if age were a locked door. Then came Thursday, when a man from church, Mr. Bell, lost his wife. Karen mentioned it while unloading groceries. Harold looked down. Poor fellow. Karen waited. You know what that first week feels like, she said. Harold stiffened. Do not start. She did not. She simply wrote Mr. Bell's number on a card and left it beside the radio. The card sat there all afternoon. At 5 o'clock, Harold picked up the phone. His voice was rough when Mr. Bell answered. This is Harold, he said. You do not have to talk. I just know the house gets loud when it is empty. That was the moment the hidden mistake finally broke open. Not because Harold became young again, not because sorrow vanished, but because he remembered something stronger than comfort. He still had an assignment. That is the climax of the whole countdown. The fastest decline after 75 often begins when a person retires from purpose before God has released them from influence. Not from work, not from youth, not from busyness, from purpose. Harold had mistaken reduced strength for finished usefulness. He had mistaken grief for permission to disappear. He had mistaken being older for being done. But one repaired radio and one phone call proved the truth. An older person can lose speed and still carry authority, lose strength and still give blessing, lose a spouse and still comfort another grieving soul, lose a former role and still receive a new assignment. Harold's life changed through small duties. Ethan came every Saturday. Mr. Bell received a call every Thursday. Harold ate one real meal at the table. He opened the curtains before coffee. He wrote 3 memories in a notebook because Karen said the family needed them. He walked to the mailbox slowly, not for exercise, but because the day deserved his participation. That is the answer hidden behind all 8 mistakes. Do not shrink before you must. Do not stop caring for your meals. Do not worship the chair. Do not let the mind go dark. Do not hide needed help. Do not let bitterness drive away love. Do not bury your stories. And above all, do not decide your life is finished while God is still giving you another morning. You may not do everything you once did, but a chair can become a throne of wisdom. A kitchen table can become a classroom. A phone call can become ministry. A story can become inheritance. One older person who refuses to disappear can still hold a family together. The mistake is believing your life is over while God is still calling your name.